The morning mist clung to the rolling hills like a shroud, wrapping the tiny village of Eldermore in a veil of mystery. It was a place that appeared untouched by time, where cobblestone streets wound between crooked houses, their wooden frames warped by years of wind and rain. Nestled in the heart of Eastern Europe, Eldermore was the kind of place you only read about in old folk tales, secluded, quiet, and seemingly forgotten by the rest of the world. Elena had heard whispers about the village from a fellow traveler at a tavern in the neighboring town. He spoke of it with an odd reverence, as if it was a place where time itself had been suspended, and she, always curious, could not resist the temptation to see it for herself. Her journey had brought her to this remote corner of the world, and now, standing at the village's edge, she felt both an eerie sense of calm and an unsettling pull to step deeper into its secrets. The village was empty when she first arrived. The air was unnaturally still, and the only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves in the trees. The few villagers she did encounter greeted her warmly, their faces friendly but strangely distant, as if their smiles had been rehearsed for years. Elena noticed that they all wore a similar expression, a mix of melancholy and something else, something she could not quite place. She stayed at a small inn, the only one in the village, run by a kindly woman named Agatha. Agatha had welcomed her with a knowing look, as if she had been expecting her all along. As night fell and the inn grew quiet, Elena sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit streets. There was something unsettling about the way the shadows moved, as if they were alive. The village seemed to breathe, its heart beating in time with the rustling of the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. It wasn't until the third night that Elena began to understand the true nature of Eldermore's silence. She had fallen into a restless sleep, her dreams slipping between reality and nightmare. In her sleep, she heard soft footsteps echoing in the dark. She awoke, heart pounding, and found herself staring at the open window. The moon was full, casting pale light over the village. And then she saw her, standing in the middle of the street, dressed in a flowing white gown. Her long dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes, oh her eyes, were empty, hollow, as if she were looking right through Elena. The woman stood motionless for a moment, and then without a sound she disappeared into the mist. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She rushed to the window, but the figure was gone. Only the mist remained, thick and suffocating, creeping through the streets like a living thing. She couldn't shake the image of the bride's empty eyes, the way she seemed to beckon to Elena without ever moving. The next morning, Elena tried to push the memory from her mind. Perhaps it had been a trick of the light, a fleeting image conjured by her own imagination. But as the days passed, the strange occurrences only grew stronger. She began to hear whispers in the night, soft voices that seemed to call her name. She saw fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye, figures that vanished as soon as she turned to look. Her dreams became more vivid. The bride was always there, standing just out of reach, her silent plea filling Elena's heart with an inexplicable sadness. In her waking moments, Elena could feel the weight of the curse that hung over the village, a presence that lingered in the corners of every building, in the faces of every villager. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena found herself drawn to the village's small chapel at the center of town. The building was old, its stone walls weathered by centuries of storms. She pushed open the creaking door, and the heavy scent of incense filled her nostrils. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the pews long abandoned. But as she stepped further into the dim interior, her eyes fell upon an ancient portrait hanging above the altar. It was the bride. Her eyes were the same. Empty. Lifeless. But in the portrait she was smiling, a smile that seemed to hold a secret. Elena's heart raced. She could not shake the feeling that the woman in the portrait was somehow calling to her. As if their fates were linked in some way, as if the bride's curse had been waiting for someone like Elena to come and uncover the truth. A chill ran down her spine, and the whispers returned, louder now, swirling around her in the church's silence. They seemed to speak in a language she could not understand, a language of sorrow and longing. "Elena," the whispers breathed. "Help me." She stumbled back, her hand brushing against the cold stone wall for support. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows thickening. And then, through the darkness, she saw the figure again, the bride. But this time she was not alone. Standing beside her was a man, his face shadowed and indistinct. Their hands reached toward each other, but before they could touch, the vision vanished, leaving only the oppressive silence of the chapel. The curse of Eldermore had found her. And the bride's story, her desperate, haunting story, was just beginning to unravel. The days that followed felt like a slow descent into madness. Elena couldn't escape the feeling that Eldermore was closing in on her, suffocating her with its secrets. The villagers, once so kind and welcoming, now seemed to watch her with wary eyes, their smiles no longer warm but thin and forced. It was as if they knew something she didn't, a truth that they were too terrified to reveal. Her sleep became increasingly disturbed. Every night, the bride visited her dreams. She would stand in the village square, waiting, her face pale and expressionless. Elena would call out to her, but the words never seemed to reach the woman. The bride's eyes, hollow and empty, would turn toward her, and then she would silently walk away, disappearing into the fog that perpetually clung to the village. Elena woke each morning drenched in cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to convince herself it was just a dream, just the product of her imagination running wild in a place so steeped in history and isolation. But the images lingered, vivid and disturbing. The bride's pleading gaze haunted her during the day, and she could no longer look at the villagers without sensing an unspoken knowledge in their eyes. It wasn't until the fifth night that the terror truly began. Elena had been walking alone in the village, her footsteps echoing off the cobblestones as the thick fog rolled in, swallowing the street lamp's pale glow. She had gone to the market earlier, hoping to speak to some of the villagers, but they had all been strangely distant, as if avoiding her questions. She felt the weight of their eyes on her as she walked, their murmurs following her every move. It was then that she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her, delicate, almost inaudible but unmistakable. Elena spun around, her heart racing. There was no one there. Just the mist, swirling like smoke in the night air. She shook her head, trying to dispel the paranoia creeping into her mind. But then the sound came again. This time it was closer and she could feel a chill creeping up her spine. The figure appeared out of the mist like a shadow emerging from the dark. It was her, the bride. She was standing in the middle of the street, just like in Elena's dreams, her long white gown billowing around her like a ghostly cloud. Her eyes locked onto Elena's, and for the first time, Elena saw something other than emptiness in them. There was fear, raw, desperate fear. "Elena," the woman whispered, her voice barely a breath above the wind. "Help me." Before Elena could respond, the figure turned and walked swiftly away, vanishing into the fog. A chill settled over her, and the world around her seemed to blur and distort, as if the very fabric of reality were unraveling. She ran after the bride, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the fog swallowed her up, and the street stretched on endlessly in front of her. She stumbled to a halt, heart pounding in her chest. Where had she gone? Why was she leading Elena into the fog? And why did it feel as if the village itself were conspiring against her, urging her to follow, to uncover the truth? A noise broke the silence, a low moan that seemed to come from beneath the ground. Elena dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as they pressed against the cold, damp cobblestones. The sound grew louder, a guttural, mournful wail that seemed to echo through the very earth beneath her. It was as if the ground itself was crying out in pain. With trembling hands, Elena dug into the earth, her nails scraping against the rough stone. The air grew colder, and she could feel the oppressive weight of something ancient pressing down on her. Her fingers brushed against something hard, a small stone, weathered and smooth. She pulled it free, and as it slid into the moonlight, she gasped. It was a ring, a delicate silver band, encrusted with small, dark stones. Elena's heart skipped a beat. It was the same ring she had seen in the portrait, the bride's ring. Before she could process the discovery, the fog thickened, and the ground beneath her began to tremble. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the ring, but the earth seemed to shift around her, pulling her toward a dark opening in the ground. The village around her distorted, twisting into an impossible labyrinth, its buildings groaning and shifting as if they were alive. A voice echoed through the fog, a low, mournful wail that froze Elena in place. "Elena, it is not over." She turned and saw the bride again, standing in the distance, her form flickering like a mirage. But this time she was not alone. Figures appeared behind her, dark shapes, their features obscured by the fog. They moved toward Elena, their footsteps dragging on the ground like heavy chains. Suddenly, the bride turned and began to walk away, her back to Elena. But this time something was different. The fog seemed to part before her, revealing a hidden path that led deeper into the village. A path that Elena had never seen before. Without thinking, Elena followed. The ring burned hot in her hand as she moved through the fog, the shapes behind her growing closer, their presence like a cold weight pressing against her shoulders. As she reached the end of the path, Elena found herself standing before the old chapel again. But this time the door was open. The air inside was thick with a heavy, suffocating darkness, and the whispers had returned, louder now, swirling around her like a storm. She stepped inside, the door creaking shut behind her with a deafening thud. The interior was dim and the air smelled of decay. But there, in the center of the chapel, stood the bride, her back to Elena, her white gown tattered and stained with blood. "Elena," the bride whispered, her voice breaking through the storm of whispers. "You must listen." The ground beneath Elena's feet trembled again, and the chapel began to shake violently. The air grew colder and she could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful, moving in the shadows. The whispers grew louder, now speaking in a language she couldn't understand. And then, in the dim light, Elena saw them. Dozens of faces, their eyes wide with terror, staring at her from the walls of the chapel. These were not just villagers. These were the souls of those who had been trapped here, condemned to relive their final moments, forever bound to the curse of the bride. "Elena," the bride's voice cracked. "You are the last." The floor beneath Elena's feet cracked open, and the cold darkness reached up to claim her. As the whispers consumed her, Elena understood. The bride was not the victim of a curse, she was the curse. And now Elena was bound to her. The village of Eldermore would never let her leave. Elena woke with a start, gasping for breath as her eyes darted around the room. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to her mind like cobwebs. For a moment she was disoriented, the lingering terror of the chapel's shaking walls and the bride's desperate voice haunting her thoughts. She was still in her room at the inn. The familiar walls, the wooden furniture, the faint light streaming through the window, it was all there. But there was something wrong, something that felt out of place, like the air had thickened around her, weighed down by an unseen presence. The shadows seemed deeper, more menacing, and even the soft hum of the wind outside felt oppressive. With trembling hands, Elena pulled herself from the bed and stumbled toward the window, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a dream? The village, the bride, the whispers, it all felt too real to be just a product of her imagination. And yet, how could it be anything but? Her gaze swept across the village and her heart skipped a beat. The fog had returned, rolling through the streets like a living thing, cloaking the village in a thick, suffocating mist. It wasn't the gentle, early morning mist that had greeted her upon her arrival. No, this was different. This was darker, heavier, as if the fog itself was a reflection of the village's soul. Elena's stomach twisted with unease. She had to leave, she thought. The answer she sought, the reason for the bride's torment, could not be found here, in this village of shadows and secrets. But something deeper within her pulled her toward the truth. She couldn't walk away, not now. Not when she felt the weight of the bride's curse pressing against her chest. The inn was eerily quiet as she descended the stairs. The soft creak of her boots echoed through the empty hall. Agatha, the innkeeper, was nowhere to be found, which struck Elena as odd. Usually, the older woman was awake before the crack of dawn, tending to the fire or preparing breakfast for the few travelers who passed through the village. A sudden crash from the back of the inn sent Elena jumping, her heart leaping into her throat. The noise was followed by a loud, guttural scream, a cry of anguish that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the building. Without thinking, Elena ran toward the source of the noise, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The hall twisted and turned, the shadows seeming to shift and grow with every step she took. She reached the back door and flung it open, her eyes widening in horror at what she saw. Agatha was lying on the ground, her body twisted in unnatural angles, her face contorted in a mask of terror. The innkeeper's eyes were wide open, but they weren't focused on Elena. Instead, they were locked on something behind her, something that made the air grow cold and dense, as if the very presence of whatever was standing there was suffocating the life from the room. Elena spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The figure that stood at the doorway was unmistakable, the bride. But she was not the same as the one Elena had seen before. Her white gown was torn and stained with dirt and blood, her once beautiful face now gaunt and hollow, her eyes sunken into dark sockets. "Elena," the bride's voice rasped, broken and hollow, a distant echo of the whispers Elena had heard in the chapel. "You are the last." The word sent a chill through Elena's body and she staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The bride's hand reached out, her long, skeletal fingers stretching toward Elena with an unnatural, jerking motion. Agatha's lifeless body jerked and twitched, as if something was trying to pull her from the floor. Elena could see the innkeeper's eyes, still wide in terror, still locked onto the bride, as if she were staring into the depths of an abyss. "No," Elena gasped, backing away further. "No, leave her alone." But the bride's gaze never wavered from Elena, and the air around them thickened with an unnatural, suffocating pressure. The world seemed to distort around her, the walls of the inn warping, stretching, as though they were about to collapse. The floor beneath her feet trembled, as if the very foundation of the building was being ripped apart. In a desperate move, Elena turned and ran. She didn't look back. The sounds of the bride's footsteps echoed behind her, relentless and horrifying, growing louder and closer with every passing second. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, for anything that might save her from the horrors closing in around her. She burst into the street, gasping for air, but the village was no better. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling in tight spirals, blocking her path. The streets stretched endlessly before her, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. She could feel the presence of the bride behind her, the oppressive weight of her curse pressing down on her from all sides. "Elena," the bride's voice whispered again, softer now, almost soothing. "You must listen. You cannot leave. The price of silence is too great." Elena's legs gave out beneath her and she collapsed to the cobblestones, her chest heaving with fear. She could hear the whispers now, clearer than ever, echoing through the village. The voices of the souls trapped here, the victims of the bride's curse. They were all calling to her, pleading for her to understand, for her to do something, anything, to break the chain that bound them to this cursed place. She had to find the truth, Elena realized. The bride's torment, the village's curse, it all tied together in a way she didn't yet understand. The villagers were not just avoiding her. They were too afraid to speak, too afraid of the price that would be exacted if they dared to defy the curse. But there was no turning back now. Elena had come too far, and the whispers in the fog had already begun to claim her. "Elena, the curse, it is not just hers," the voice whispered again, and for the first time, it didn't sound like the bride. It was the voice of someone else, someone old, someone long forgotten. "It is yours too." The realization hit her like a wave crashing against jagged rocks. She had been marked from the moment she stepped foot in Eldermore. The bride's curse had claimed her, and there would be no escape. With a final, trembling breath, Elena rose to her feet. The fog parted before her, revealing a hidden path that she had not seen before. It beckoned her forward, and with no other choice, Elena began to walk toward it, the whispers of the dead trailing behind her. The price of silence had been paid long ago. Now it was her turn to break the curse. The fog seemed to tighten around Elena like a vice. Every step she took deeper into the village, feeling like a trap closing in on her. The air was thick, oppressive, and the ground beneath her feet pulsed as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Her mind was consumed by the terrifying realization that the village's curse was now hers as well, bound to her like a shadow that would never leave. As she walked, her footsteps echoed louder than they should have, reverberating off the distorted, shifting buildings that lined the streets. The village had no true sense of time or space. Each alleyway, each cobblestone, felt like it had existed in multiple dimensions, constantly shifting and changing, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The twisted buildings leaned in toward her, their windows dark and empty, staring at her like hollow eyes, watching her every move. The whispering voices had stopped. Or rather, Elena could no longer distinguish them from the pounding of her own heart. It felt as though the entire village was holding its breath, waiting. Waiting for her to do what? She didn't know, but she had no choice but to continue moving forward, driven by a force she couldn't understand. The path that had appeared before her was narrow, almost hidden beneath the thick fog that parted just enough to reveal it. It was an old, forgotten road, one that felt older than the village itself. There were no lanterns to guide her, no sounds except for the soft shuffle of her feet and the occasional groan of the village settling deeper into the ground. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she reached the end of the path. Before her stood a large, iron gate, its rusted bars twisted and gnarled like the roots of an ancient tree. Beyond the gate, the mist cleared for the first time, revealing an imposing stone building, a cathedral, its spires reaching toward the dark sky. The cathedral was unlike any Elena had ever seen. It was not a place of peace nor a house of worship. There was something wrong about it, something dark, as though the stone itself had absorbed the anguish and sorrow of centuries. The walls were covered in strange, cryptic carvings, their meanings long lost to time, and above the main entrance was a single inscription: "The price is paid." The gate creaked open slowly as if responding to an unspoken command. Elena hesitated for only a moment before stepping through, the air around her thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. She could feel the weight of the place pressing down on her, and with every step, it became harder to breathe. Inside, the cathedral was empty, save for one thing. The bride stood at the altar, her back to Elena. Her gown was no longer white, but a tattered, torn fabric stained with dark splotches. The woman's hair hung in wild, disheveled tangles, and her once beautiful face had become a hollow mask of torment. But what struck Elena the most were her eyes, no longer empty and soulless, they burned with a kind of desperate pleading. They turned toward Elena, locking onto hers with a gaze that could tear through the very soul. "Elena," the bride said, her voice fractured, her words heavy with an ancient sorrow. "You cannot leave." Elena's throat tightened, the words caught in her chest. She took a step forward, but the bride held up a hand, stopping her. The air around them seemed to shimmer, as though the very space between them was bending. "You've come this far. You are bound to me now," the bride whispered, her voice breaking. "It is too late." Elena shook her head, panic surging within her. No, this can't be real. You can't do this to me. I'll fight it. I'll break the curse." The bride's lips twisted into a faint, sad smile. "You don't understand. The curse is not just mine. It is the village's. It is the land's. And now, it is yours. You have been chosen." A chill swept through Elena's body, and she felt her limbs go cold. The very air in the cathedral seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as though the place itself were alive, breathing with a malevolent force. The walls groaned and shadows danced around her, stretching and shifting like living things. The bride's gaze never wavered. "Do you hear them? The whispers. The voices of those who came before you? The souls trapped here like me? They are the ones who have paid the price. Their lives were taken by the curse of this land. And now, you are the last." "Elena, you must listen," a voice whispered in the shadows. She whipped around, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the cathedral, half hidden in the gloom. Elena could make out a pale face, its eyes hollow and filled with an ancient sorrow. The figure stepped closer, and Elena recognized the worn face of Agatha, the innkeeper. I didn't want you to be caught in this," Agatha's voice trembled. "I never wanted you to know the truth. But now that you have, you must understand. You are not the first to come here. The curse has taken many." "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice raw. "What is the price?" "The land itself. It feeds on sorrow." "On death," Agatha said, stepping closer, her form flickering like a shadow. The bride, she was sacrificed to the land. Her love was taken from her, and in her anguish she became the vessel for the curse. She has bound everyone to this place, and the curse feeds on those who try to leave. You are tied to her now. Your soul will be bound here forever unless... Unless what? Elena's heart raced. "Tell me what I must do." Agatha hesitated, her eyes darting around the cathedral as if searching for something, some unseen threat. "You must break the cycle. You must free her. Only then can the curse be lifted." "The bride?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. "How can I do that?" Agatha's face grew paler, her form fading with every passing second. "She was never meant to die. She was meant to live, to love. But her love was stolen from her by greed, by the villagers, by the land itself. If you can find the heart of the curse, the source, and bring her peace, then and only then can you leave." Elena felt her body grow heavy, the weight of the truth pressing on her chest. The bride was not the villain. She was the victim. And the only way to break free was to release her from the curse that bound them all. But as Elena turned toward the bride again, she could see the shadows closing in on the woman, twisting around her like a net of despair. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder this time, a chorus of voices pleading for release. The price had been paid. Now Elena had to decide, would she save herself or would she save the bride and set them both free? The cold stone beneath Elena's feet felt as though it were reaching up to swallow her whole, the walls of the cathedral pressing in on her, whispering promises of despair. Her heart thundered in her chest, and yet, there was no escaping the dread that had rooted itself within her. The fog outside was no longer a distant threat. It had seeped into the very air she breathed, and with it came the weight of the bride's tragic story, the curse that had held them all captive for so long. The bride stood before her, silent, her hollow eyes filled with the kind of sorrow that could crush a soul. Elena could feel it, feel the centuries of pain, the longing for release, the endless yearning to be reunited with a lost love. And yet, there was something more, something darker about the bride's presence. The longer Elena stood there, the more she realized that the bride wasn't just the victim of the curse, she was the source of it. Agatha's words echoed in her mind, "You must find the heart of the curse. Only then can you break it." But how? How could she possibly free the bride when the very foundation of the curse seemed to be built around her pain? A sharp, chilling wind swept through the cathedral, making the shadows dance along the walls. The bride's form flickered as though she were losing coherence, and her face twisted with an expression of deep agony. Her lips parted, and the words that escaped were like a funeral dirge, soft, mournful, but filled with an unbearable weight. Elena, you have come too far, there is no way back. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand here, frozen in fear, while this woman, this lost soul, continued to suffer for eternity. Why? Elena asked, her voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Why are you haunting us all? The bride's gaze never left her. I did not choose this, she whispered, her voice quivering. It was the price demanded of me. The villagers, they wanted me to be their queen, to marry the one they chose for me. But I loved someone else. Someone they forbade. And when they found out, they took him from me. They killed him, and in my grief they sacrificed me to the land. I became the vessel for the curse that haunts this place. My sorrow gave birth to the darkness, and the darkness, it feeds. The wind howled around them, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching like hands that reached for Elena, clawing at her skin. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. Is there no way to end it? Elena asked, her voice breaking. No way to stop this pain? The bride's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Elena saw a flicker of the woman she once was, the love, the kindness, the life that had been stolen from her. There is a way, the bride said softly. But it is a price no one is willing to pay. To release me from this curse, you must free me from my own sorrow. You must return me to the one I loved. Only then will the curse be broken. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Return the bride to her love? But how? He was dead, he had been dead for centuries. How could anyone bring back the dead? The bride's form shimmered again, and the sorrow in her eyes deepened. You must understand, my love was not just a man. He was the heart of the curse. The villagers killed him to silence our love. But his soul still lingers here, bound to the land. To release me, you must find him. Elena's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a dizzying blur. The heart of the curse, the words gnawed at her. The villagers had killed the bride's lover, and in doing so, had set in motion the very curse that had trapped them all here. But where was he now? How could she find him? The bride's eyes locked onto hers once more, and for a brief moment, Elena saw the truth. The curse wasn't just a reflection of the bride's grief, it was a reflection of her own lost love, of all the things that had been taken from her. The village, the land, the people, all were connected to the heart of the curse. But there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface, that Elena hadn't yet discovered. You must go to the old well, the bride whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. It is there that you will find what remains of him. But be warned, Elena, you must face the darkness within yourself to release us both. Without another word, the bride's figure began to dissolve into the shadows, her form disintegrating like mist. Her voice lingered in the air, the final words a haunting whisper, the price is steep, but if you are willing to pay it, you may yet find peace. Elena stood in the now empty cathedral, the silence pressing down on her like a weight she could barely carry. The fog outside had thickened even more, and the shadows seemed to crawl along the walls. But she had no time to waste. If the bride's love was truly still here, somewhere beneath the surface waiting to be found, then she had to find him. For the bride, for the villagers, and for herself. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Elena was no longer just a visitor in this cursed village. She was a part of it. And if she had any hope of escaping its grip, she had to confront the darkness that lay hidden within the well. The old well lay at the edge of the village, shrouded in an eerie quiet. Elena had found her way there, drawn by the pull of the bride's words. She stood before it now, staring down into the dark pit that seemed to stretch infinitely downward, as though it were a hole leading into the very heart of the earth. The air around her was thick with anticipation, the shadows pressing in on her from all sides. The fog was thicker here, the mist curling around her legs like tendrils trying to pull her in. Her heart beat faster, her palms sweaty as she gripped the edge of the stone well. Elena, the voice of the bride echoed from somewhere in the darkness. The heart of the curse is buried here. You must face it. You must embrace the truth. Elena swallowed hard, her breath shaky. She had no choice now. The only way to end the curse, to free herself and the bride, was to descend into the depths of the well, and find what lay at its heart. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then, with trembling hands, she lowered herself into the well, her body descending into the cold darkness below. As she descended, she could feel the air growing colder, the pressure building in her chest. And then, something whispered, something ancient and terrifying. Welcome, Elena. You have come to claim your truth. The well swallowed her whole, its depths pulling her deeper and deeper into the inky blackness. Elena's fingers scraped against the rough stones of the well as she descended, each breath becoming harder to draw, the cold more biting with every inch that passed. The shadows seemed to swirl around her, whispering in a language she couldn't understand, yet the meaning behind it was unmistakable. You cannot escape what is already inside you. She reached the bottom, her feet landing softly on the cold stone floor. The darkness here was all-encompassing, but she could still feel something ancient and alive lurking just beyond her sight. A strange, oppressive force hung in the air, and as she stood still, she realized that it wasn't just the well itself that was deep, it was the curse. It had burrowed into her soul, twisting it, and now she was face to face with the source. Elena, welcome. The voice was soft, yet piercing, and it seemed to come from everywhere. Her heart skipped in her chest as the darkness before her rippled, and slowly, a figure emerged from the depths. It was him. The bride's lost love, his form indistinct, shifting like the fog that clung to the village, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He was more than a ghost, more than a memory. He was an echo of the past, a piece of the curse itself, bound here by his own death, bound by the pain that had torn apart the bride's heart. You have come to free her, he said, his voice calm yet filled with sorrow. But do you understand the cost? Elena could feel the weight of his words as though they were chains tightening around her chest. She had come to end this, to free them both, but now she understood. The curse was not just a consequence of the bride's pain. It was a reflection of her own, of love lost, of a life stolen. She had thought she could simply break the curse, but the curse was part of her too. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. How do I free her? His eyes, full of unspoken truths, met hers. You must confront the past. The love that was stolen from us is buried here, in the heart of the curse. But freeing us means you must accept the pain, the sorrow, the price. The words echoed in her mind, and with them came a flood of memories, fragments of a life that had never been hers, but that she could feel so deeply within her heart. She saw the bride, young, full of life, her face alight with joy, and the man who loved her. She saw the village, quiet and dark, with shadows whispering of things best left buried. She saw the moment of their betrayal, the moment they were torn apart by the greed of others. She felt the cold hand of death close in on their love, and then she saw herself standing at the edge of the well, faced with a choice that she had to make. Is it worth it? Elena asked, the question hanging heavy between them. Is it worth releasing you both, knowing what it will cost? The man's form flickered, his eyes softening with understanding. It is not a question of worth. It is a question of truth. Love is never free of pain. To free her is to embrace the truth that she has carried for so long, to give her what she never had. And in doing so you free yourself. Elena's heart ached as the weight of his words sank in. She had been running from her own grief, from her own sense of loss and isolation. But now she understood, the curse wasn't just the bride's, it was hers too. The sorrow, the longing, the unresolved pain, it was all part of the cycle. And to break it she had to face it. She had to accept the cost just as the bride had. The man stepped closer, his form becoming more solid, more real. The heart of the curse is not something to defeat, Elena. It is something to accept. You must let go just as we have. With that, he extended his hand toward her. For a moment, Elena hesitated, the weight of what she was about to do settling upon her. But then she reached out. She took his hand, and in that moment the world around them seemed to shatter, like glass breaking under the weight of truth. The air in the well shifted, the oppressive darkness receding, replaced by a soft, ethereal glow. Elena's body seemed to float, her feet no longer touching the ground. She felt the presence of the bride, felt her love, her sorrow, and for the first time she truly understood what they had both endured. The curse was not something to break. It was something to release. And in that release Elena felt the weight on her chest lift. She felt the sorrow that had bound her to this place dissipate like smoke. The man and the bride, their forms now shimmering in the light, stood together, their faces serene. You have freed us, the man whispered, his voice barely audible now. Thank you. Elena closed her eyes, feeling a deep peace wash over her. She had done it. She had faced the curse and in doing so had freed them all. The land, the village, the spirits, they were all released. The curse had been broken, not by force but by acceptance, by embracing the truth that love and loss were inseparable, that only by facing the pain could peace finally be found. As the light around her grew brighter, Elena felt herself being pulled upward back to the surface. When her feet finally touched the ground again, she was no longer in the well. The village was gone, the fog lifting, the air crisp and clean. The cathedral was no longer there, nor the twisted village. Only the ruins of what had once been remained, silent and still. The bride and her love were no longer bound to the land, their souls finally at peace. And as Elena turned to leave, the village faded from her memory as if it had never been real. For all the horror, for all the suffering, Elena had learned something. She had learned that the curse was not just a supernatural force. It was a reflection of human pain. It was a reminder that in every tragedy there is a choice, to let it consume you or to face it, release it, and find peace. And so, as Elena walked away, her footsteps fading into the distance, the curse was no more. The village no longer haunted the land. And with that, Elena knew the truth. Some stories are not meant to be told. Some are just born from the shadows of the mind, twisted and forgotten. And this, she realized, was one of them. This is not a true story. But perhaps, in some forgotten corner of the world, there is a village and a bride still waiting to be freed. And maybe, just maybe, the price of peace is still to be paid.